ahead and start the very next video. So get your pen and highlighter out and open up your ears and get ready to pause. Remember, you always want to pause when I'm changing slides. It always helps you kind of get what you need to write down and then listen to me because you never know what I'm going to say. So let's start with the life in the colonies. Now, we've talked about 3 different areas of life in the colonies, and just kind of review with me here. 3 different geographical areas. Of course, you have the North. Now, we call the North kind of the New England colonies or the Massachusetts Bay Area. How do they make their money? Think about it. Okay, they're going to make their money with fishing and trade and industries and in some raw resources like lumber. Then you have the South. What do you think of when you think South? You think warm climate, right? You probably think in agriculture. You know eventually it's going to get to cotton, right? But what is actually the #1 crop down in the South, in Virginia in particular, in the beginning? You're right if you said tobacco. You're going to have a profit motive down in the South, whereas in the North you had a religious motive. And then you have a little bit in the middle. You've got New York, you've got Pennsylvania, Quaker Pennsylvania. There's definitely middle, and they're more about trade and industry. They don't really have anything to their name. They just kind of play off of both of the other ones. So life in the colonies, a very first slide. Let me go ahead and let you pause. Get this down. Okay, so social structure. Very first thing I want you to do, and I'm going to be looking for this. This is the stuff I look for. I want you to circle the word social. What does it mean, social? Think about it. It means people. So the people structures and the family life of each of these areas. Now in the South, let's start with the South down here. I think there's a couple things that I would make sure that you notate on here. There is a wide gap in the South between rich and poor. You got the rich, 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 the poor, poor, poor. I don't know about y'all, but when I think the South, I think of back then, I think plantations, white mansions, women in beautiful silk gowns and, servants serving them, the rich, 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 the poor, poor, poor. And of course, then you have the slaves, all of the slaves, because indentured servants have kind of gone by the wayside. The headright system has declined. Slavery has increased. Now, there is a planter aristocracy, okay, there. That's what you're thinking of there with that visual image. There are some planners that are hardworking, probably middle class, but not very many. The one thing I definitely need you to circle, and I'll be checking for this, is this #3 right here. There's very few cities in the South, and there's very poor transportation in the South. They're basically agriculturally based. They don't need cities. They don't need transportation. And while that's going to work for them in the 1600s, man, and maybe even the 1700s, the 1800s, when we start looking at the Civil War, you don't have a transportation system. You can't get your stuff places. You can't get your troops places, your guns places, your things. You're going to lose the Civil War. And guess what? They did. Now in the South, this is important to note. Make sure you remember this. Star, star, star. Women have more rights and are more powerful in the South. One thing I would tell you, and you might want to write this out beside the South, there's less women. When you have less of something, it's worth more. And when you have less of something, people in general, okay, you're going to find out that the population is bigger in the North right over here. But in the South, it's smaller. If you have less people, they all have to work. When women roll up their sleeves and get to work, they're going to get more rights. They're going to get more respect. Just like the very first place for women to get voting rights in the 1800s, it's going to be the West, because women had to work alongside the men, so they gave them more rights. Now in the North, transition. Let's go over here, annotate over here. Gap's not as wide. I do definitely think you need to highlight industrialization begins, growing population. How is this going to help out when we look at the Civil War? You have an industrial complex. You can make guns, uniforms, weapons. I mean, anything you could possibly imagine. Growing population. Well, you got more people. You got more soldiers, right? Early marriage, high birth rates. Women could often die during childbirth. Obedient family ties. I'm going to be real honest with you. What guides and is the basically ruling factor in the North? The Bible. I would literally put a cross by the North, and then I'd go over here and put a money sign by the South. If the cross rules the North, the Bible technically tells women you are subservient. And so in the North, they have less rights. But I will be honest with you, altogether, women don't have very many rights during the colonial time. It's just they had a little bit more in the South. Next slide. Pause. Get it down. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this. Religion leads Northern lifestyle. We don't need to be told that twice. You need to remember it, though. Towns in New England to unite. That's your New England Confederation right there. You might even write it out beside there. Remember the New England versus the Iroquois. They're going to start to unite. Religion makes that unity very important, but also it's a common enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. There you go. So we have unity starting in the North, which will help out in the American Revolution later. But I think this one's important, and you didn't even have to write it, but I might star it. In the North, when you had 50 plus families, every town had to have a school. And then you start thinking about, well, if they have a school, they're learning how to read. And if you learn how to read, you start reading things. What do you read? The newspaper, a pamphlet, maybe by Thomas Paine, called Common. You see where I'm going with this? It's hard to control people who are educated. And so in the North, when they become educated, they become harder to control later by the crown. That's where your American Revolution comes in. And then the Puritans do run churches democratically. Just might want to circle that. Meaning the people run the churches, which leads to democracy. Now, pause, go. All right, melting pot from the start. You guys know what a melting pot is, right? Melting pot means everything in one. Immigration is, I'm going to be honest with you, it's a hot topic even in today's day and age, but it's a topic that has been around ever from the beginning, because unless you are a Native American, we are all immigrants to this country, okay? Now, the groups of immigrants in colonial times, the Germans are going to settle in Pennsylvania. Are we clear? The Scots and the Irish, they are going to be kicked out of Ireland because they are not Catholic. They settle in the mountains, okay? Lawless, individualistic, Appalachian Mountains. Whiskey-making fools is what I put. The Scot and the Irish, man, they could drink some people under the table. Kind of crazy. But that's what they did. Not wanted by Germans or New Englanders, so they're forced into the hills. So the Germans go to Pennsylvania, the Scots and Irish go to the mountains. Other groups that are embraced, the French, the Dutch, the Swedes, the Jews, the Irish, the Swiss, some Irish, probably the money-making Irish, okay? They're going to be okay, but you want to know what's ironic that we never think about? Oh my gosh. Don't ever think about this, but it's totally true. You want to know what the largest immigrant group in the colonial time period was? Slaves. African American slaves. African slaves. And until they start having generations, it's African slaves. So that's one thing that I might ask you. It's a little bit of, I don't want to say it's a trick question. It's just that our mind doesn't think of slaves as immigrants because they didn't choose to come here. But are they? They sure are. Pause this. Get it down. This one's important. I'm going to talk about it. All right. So looking at this slide, it's actually quite simple. But I'll be very honest with you. Triangular trade is something that a lot of my students get mixed up with the Columbian Exchange. You can't do it. The very first thing I'm going to tell you is triangular trade. I would always remember one thing in particular. Actually, three things, because a triangle has 3 points to it. Yes? This is going to be the exchange of resources from 3 places. Make sure you circle the 3 places, please. The Americas, England, and Africa. Okay? And when I say Americas, I can even mean the Indies, okay? But with this, you have different things produced at different points in the triangle. Americas, and even though it does not say what kind of resources, it just says sugar on your notes right here, would you please make sure you put what is sugar and lumber and all this other stuff? What kind of resources? Think about it. What is it? A raw resource. So make sure you write that out beside that right there. Then what they do is they send those natural resources to England. Now, what England does with all those resources, remember mercantilism, yes, okay? They're going to produce them, and they're either going to send them back to the Americas, or they might even send them to Africa and trade them for what are we going to pick up in Africa? Slaves. Now, when they pick up slaves in Africa, where do slaves need to go to work to get those natural raw resources out of the ground? The Americas. So with that, you have this triangular trade, that starts to evolve. What do colonies provide a mother country in a mercantilist economy is the question I have at the top of your notes. What did the colonies provide? What kind of resources? Raw or natural resources. Why is this good for England, I ask on the notes? Why do you think it's good? Raw resources are actually sometimes even more valuable than finished goods because you can do anything with them and there's an abundance of them. So it puts England in the driver's seat. Why is this bad for the colonists? Well, think about it. What are the colonists being used for? Resources, yes? And then when they get those resources back as finished products, what has England done to the price? increased it. After the French and Indian War, England's going to get greedy and they're going to say, these colonists are costing us money. What are we going to do these finished product to get more money out of them? Tax them. No taxation without representation. There you go. And this is kind of just a little bit of an image of your triangular trade. Of course, you have Europe, Americas, and Africa. Of course, that's where going to be slaves, natural resources, finished good. And you're just going to have this go all the time. Now, this right here is called the Middle Passage. That's where the slaves, of course. I don't think we need to talk about it too much, but you're talking about one of the most horrific things you could possibly imagine. Dead bodies, days, so absolutely awful. Okay, let's go ahead and pause, get this down. Okay, mercantilism leads to something called salutary neglect. I already talked about it a little bit, but it's super important, okay? The very first thing we want to take a look at is in the 1660s to 80s, England's going to pass something called the Navigation Acts. Make sure you highlight that. They were passed to control colonial overseas commerce to make sure that basically the colonies only traded with the mother country, because the mother country doesn't want to compete for her own colony's business. Well, during the 17th and early 18th centuries, many colonists ignored them. Remember when I was telling you about smuggling? Yes? Okay? Well, they ignored them. And as long as England was getting the money they wanted, do I care? No, not really. The mother country's all the way over on one side of the ocean, and the baby country's all the way over on the other side of the ocean. The baby's been doing what they want. Well, let me tell you something. That's okay as long as Mama's still getting money. But when Mama stops making money because of the French and Indian War, there's going to be an issue. So the mother country and the colonies will come to kind of a impasse with salutary neglect because the mom is neglected to discipline. Well, when you neglect to discipline a child for too long, y'all know this, they get out of control. If I let you guys do whatever you wanted for the first 6 weeks of my class, what would you expect to do for the last 5-6 weeks? Whatever you wanted. Then would you pass any tests or make any college money? Nope. So sometimes when I mean, it's just because I love you. I sound like your parents, don't I? Sorry, but I do. Here's a good kind of cartoon here. The mother country, queen, she's eating, she's kind of plump. And what are the servants or the colonies serving her? Gold and silver, foodstuffs, raw materials. The mercantilist argument for colonial expansion. Something interesting to look at. All right, let's go ahead and pause it here. We'll start the last video after this. Hope y'all are getting this done. Remember, if you don't think that you're understanding it, you can always go back and rewind. All right, y'all are awesome.